Dr. Thomas Mitchell froze mid-motion, the syringe of pentobarbital suspended between his weathered fingers and the trembling German shepherd puppy. What should have been routine euthanasia of another dangerous animal shattered when the pup placed his paw gently on the doctor's hand. The medical record said aggressive biter, but the dog's amber eyes held only fear and a desperate plea. Officer Garcia shifted uncomfortably, hand reflexively touching his holster. "Doc, everything okay?" His voice echoed in the suddenly too quiet exam room. 7 years as a widower had taught Thomas to lock emotions away, yet this small gesture from a condemned creature pierced straight through that careful armor. The last time he'd felt this undone was when Margaret had squeezed his hand before slipping away. "I need to run some tests first," he heard himself say, voice steady despite the storm inside. What secret was this pup trying to tell him? And why did Westfield, the town's most respected breeder, want him dead so urgently? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Along with the city you're watching from now, let's continue with the story. Pine Ridge, Virginia wasn't much more than a speck on the map, but to Dr. Thomas Mitchell, it had been home for all his 68 years. The town's single main street curved around a small central park where maple trees had witnessed generations come and go. Some mornings, when Thomas opened his clinic before sunrise, he could almost see ghosts of the past, children who now had grandchildren, buildings long replaced, and Margaret, always Margaret, walking through autumn leaves. Pine Ridge Animal Clinic sat at the edge of town, a modest brick building with a faded blue awning. Thomas had purchased it 40 years ago, fresh out of veterinary school, full of idealism and plans. Now the building showed its age, much like its owner, functional but worn, reliable but unremarkable. The waiting room walls displayed photographs of animals Thomas had treated over the decades, alongside his veterinary degree and community service awards that had yellowed with time. "Morning, Ellen," Thomas nodded to his receptionist as he entered, shaking raindrops from his jacket. She'd been with him 15 years, knew his routines better than he did. The coffee would already be brewing, files arranged in order of appointments. "You're looking tired, Doc," Ellen observed, sliding his schedule across the counter. "Those late nights catching up to you?" Thomas didn't mention he'd spent another sleepless night pacing his too-empty house, looking at old photos. "Just the weather," he deflected. "Joints aren't what they used to be." The morning passed with routine procedures, vaccines for the Andersons' new kitten, ear medication for Mrs. Whitaker's beagle, antibiotics for Reverend Lewis's tabby. Thomas moved through each appointment with practiced efficiency, his hands performing examinations while his mind remained elsewhere. When had medicine become mechanical? When had he stopped feeling the connection that once made his calling meaningful? 7 years. And 7 years since Margaret's cancer had taken her, and with her, something vital inside him. Their son Michael had moved away shortly after the funeral, unable to bear the weight of his father's silent grief. Now their communication consisted of brief birthday calls and Christmas cards with generic messages. At lunch, Thomas sat alone in his office, not eating, staring at the photograph on his desk. Margaret at 45, laughing by the lake, her blonde hair catching sunlight. "I'm just going through the motions, Maggie," he whispered to the empty room. "Maybe it's time to retire." His afternoon appointment book showed the name Richard Westfield. Thomas frowned, recognizing it immediately. Westfield Kennels produced champion German shepherds, and Richard sat on every important board in the county. His donations had built the hospital's new wing, funded the library renovation, and secured his position as Pine Ridge's unofficial ruler. Thomas had never much cared for the man's self-importance, but their professional relationship remained cordial. What bothered Thomas were the dogs. Over the years, he'd seen too many Westfield animals brought in for euthanasia, always with the same reason: aggressive behavior, danger to the community, always with Westfield's signature on the forms, authorizing their end with the same flourish he used to sign charity gala checks. Thomas closed the appointment book, a nameless unease settling in his stomach. He glanced at the clock. 2 hours until Officer Garcia would arrive with another Westfield dog. 2 hours until he would be asked once again to end a life on Richard Westfield's word alone. Rain pelted against the clinic windows as Officer Garcia's patrol car pulled into the parking lot precisely at 3:30 p.m. Thomas watched from his office, noting how the young officer hunched his shoulders against the downpour as he carefully removed a pet carrier from the back seat. Even through the rain-streaked glass, Thomas could see the tension in Garcia's movements, the way his free hand hovered near his service weapon, as if the small creature inside the carrier might somehow overpower him. "Sorry to bother you with this one, Doc," Garcia said as he entered, water dripping from his uniform. Westfield was adamant about having it taken care of immediately. He placed the carrier on the examination table, maintaining a cautious distance. "Bit his grandson pretty badly, from what I understand." Thomas nodded, professional mask firmly in place. "Let me have a look." He approached the carrier slowly, aware of the soft whimpering coming from inside. When he peered through the metal grate, he met a pair of amber eyes that seemed too intelligent, too aware for a puppy of this age. The German Shepherd couldn't have been more than 8 months old, his ears still slightly oversized for his head, giving him an endearing, almost comical appearance that contrasted sharply with his dangerous animal designation. "His name's Scout, according to the paperwork," Garcia offered, sliding a clipboard across the table. "Westfield wants it done today, said to call him when it's finished." Thomas skimmed the form, noting Richard Westfield's dramatic signature at the bottom. The description was brief. "Unprovoked attack on child, severe biting, too dangerous to rehome. No medical history, no vaccination records, just a death sentence." "I'll need to examine him before proceeding," Thomas said, his voice carefully neutral. "Standard protocol for any euthanasia case." Garcia nodded, clearly relieved to be leaving this responsibility in someone else's hands. "I'll leave you to it then. Just need your signature when it's done for our records." After the officer left, Thomas took a deep breath and opened the carrier door. "Easy now, Scout," he murmured, extending his hand slowly. "Let's see what you're all about." To his surprise, the puppy didn't growl or lunge as the paperwork suggested he might. Instead, Scout cowered at the back of the carrier, trembling visibly. It took nearly 20 minutes of patient coaxing before the dog would allow Thomas to touch him, and another 10 before he would step onto the examination table. "Not exactly the profile of an aggressive biter, are you?" Thomas muttered as he began his examination. Scout stood rigid but compliant, flinching at every touch but making no move to snap or growl. As Thomas ran his hands gently along the dog's body, he discovered what the oversized collar had concealed, a ring of bruising around the neck, along with several partially healed lacerations along the rib cage and hindquarters. "What happened to you, boy?" Thomas whispered, photographing each injury with his phone. Scout's eyes never left his face, watching with an intensity that made Thomas uncomfortable. Not fear of the dog, but fear of what he was discovering. The clinic phone rang, startling them both. Thomas glanced at the caller ID, Westfield's personal number. He let it go to voicemail, continuing his examination as the answering machine picked up. "Dr. Mitchell." Westfield's smooth, confident voice filled the room. "Officer Garcia tells me he's dropped off the animal. I wanted to personally emphasize the importance of handling this matter promptly. My grandson required 7 stitches. I'll expect your call confirming completion within the hour." Thomas's jaw tightened as he discovered another set of injuries, puncture wounds on Scout's hind leg that appeared consistent with a training spike, a cruel device used in underground dogfighting circles. These weren't the injuries of an aggressor. They were the marks of a victim. "This doesn't add up, Scout," he said softly, reaching for his medical camera to properly document everything. As he photographed the evidence, memories surfaced of other Westfield dogs he'd euthanized over the years. Had he missed similar signs? Had he been complicit in something terrible through his professional detachment? The clinic door chimed, and Thomas heard Ellen's voice greeting someone in the reception area. A moment later, she appeared at his office door. "Dr. Mitchell, there's a Sarah Collins here to see you. Says it's about the Westfield dog." Thomas frowned. The name was vaguely familiar, but he couldn't place it. "Send her in, please." The woman who entered was in her mid-40s, with short auburn hair and the confident stride of someone familiar with animal clinics. She stopped short when she saw Scout on the examination table, her expression tightening. "You haven't done it yet," she said, relief evident in her voice. "Thank God." "I'm sorry, Ms. Collins, but do I know you?" Thomas asked, instinctively moving to stand between her and Scout. "I used to work for you, about 7 years ago, just for a summer, filling in for Ellen's maternity leave." She offered a tight smile. "Then I worked for Westfield Kennels for almost 3 years, until I started asking too many questions about his breeding program." Thomas studied her face, memory finally clicking into place. "You filed a complaint with the county about improper breeding practices." "A complaint that mysteriously disappeared," Sarah said grimly. "Just like every other attempt to investigate Richard Westfield's operation." She nodded toward Scout. "He's not aggressive, is he? Despite what the paperwork says." "No," Thomas admitted, glancing at the puppy who had relaxed slightly at Sarah's presence. "In fact, he shows clear signs of abuse. But how did you know about this? Why are you here?" Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Thomas a series of text messages. "I still have friends who work at the kennels. They let me know when Westfield marks a dog for disposal. I usually can't get here in time, but today—" She trailed off, looking at Scout with genuine concern. "This puppy refused to fight. That's his real crime." "Fight?" Thomas echoed, though the puncture wounds he'd documented already told the story. "Westfield isn't just breeding show dogs, Dr. Mitchell. He's breeding fighters. The ones with the right temperament go to his private clients. The ones like Scout, who won't attack despite the training." She didn't need to finish the sentence. Thomas felt a chill run through him. If what Sarah was saying was true, he had been unwittingly participating in something abhorrent for years. How many innocent animals had he put down without questioning, without examining closely enough? The professional distance he'd cultivated after Margaret's death hadn't just numbed his pain, it had blinded him. "I need proof," he said finally, turning back to Scout. "Real evidence, not just suspicions." "That's why I'm here," Sarah replied. "Help me save this one, and I'll show you everything I've gathered over the past 2 years, enough to shut Westfield down for good." Thomas's phone rang again. Westfield, for the second time. The implied threat in his earlier message was clear. Thomas looked at Scout, at the trusting eyes that had stopped him from performing what should have been a routine procedure. Then he looked at Sarah, whose determined expression offered him something he hadn't felt in years: purpose. "Let me make a call," he said, reaching for his phone. Not to return Westfield's call, but to contact the emergency veterinary clinic 2 towns over, where no one would think to look for a dog that was supposed to be dead. By nightfall, Scout was safely hidden, and Thomas Mitchell had taken the first step down a path that would challenge everything about the careful, detached life he had built since losing Margaret. A path that would put him directly in opposition to the most powerful man in Pine Ridge. Thomas awoke before dawn the next morning, his mind racing with questions that had chased him through a fitful sleep. He made coffee in the kitchen, where Margaret's decorative plates still hung on the walls, untouched since her death. The house remained frozen in time, a museum to their life together. Only his study showed signs of current habitation, with its scattered medical journals and half-empty cups. At his computer, Thomas began searching through the clinic's digital records, filtering for cases involving Westfield Kennels. The results were more disturbing than he'd anticipated. Over the past 5 years, he'd euthanized 27 dogs at Westfield's request, all with nearly identical paperwork citing aggressive behavior or dangerous temperament. Not once had he questioned the assessment or performed a thorough examination. The professional detachment he'd prided himself on now felt like negligence. "What have I been doing?" he whispered to the empty room, scrolling through case after case. He'd become exactly what Margaret had always feared, a doctor who treated medicine as a procedure rather than a calling. The thought of her disappointment weighed on him more heavily than any professional failing. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Meet me at Riverside Park, 7 a.m. Bring whatever records you found." The morning air was crisp as Thomas walked along the river path, a manila folder tucked under his arm. Sarah was already waiting on a bench, hands wrapped around a travel mug, watching a pair of cardinals flit between branches. "I've been coming here every morning for 2 years," she said without preamble, "watching people walk their dogs, remembering what normal looks like." She nodded toward his folder. "What did you find?" Thomas handed her the documents. 27 euthanized dogs in 5 years. All from Westfield Kennels, all with the same reason given. Sarah didn't look surprised as she flipped through the pages. "And how many did you personally examine for signs of abuse before putting them down?" The question stung, but Thomas couldn't dodge the truth. "None. I took Westfield's word." "We all did," Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. "That's how he operates. He makes everyone complicit, one small compromise at a time." She reached into her backpack and pulled out a thick binder. "This is what I've been collecting. Financial records, breeding logs, photographs, and testimony from 3 former employees willing to come forward." Thomas opened the binder, his stomach tightening at the first page. A map of underground dogfighting venues across 3 states, with Pine Ridge at the center. How is this possible in our town? The breeding facility, you see, the champion show dogs everyone admires. That's just the front. The real money comes from breeding and training fighting dogs for wealthy clients who pay top dollar for animals that will win in the pit. Sarah flipped to a series of photographs showing kennels far different from the pristine facilities Westfield showcased in local newspaper features. These are the training grounds, hidden on the back 40 acres of his property. Thomas felt physically ill looking at the images of training equipment designed to enhance aggression, of dogs kept in isolation to increase fighting drive. And Scout? Scout was supposed to be one of his best, perfect bloodline, perfect physical attributes. But some dogs, no matter the breeding or training, refuse to develop the killing instinct. They'll defend themselves, but they won't fight to the death. Sarah smiled sadly. Those dogs become liabilities, evidence of failure. Before Thomas could respond, his phone rang. Ellen's name flashed on the screen. "Dr. Mitchell? You need to come in right away." "There's someone here from the veterinary board. Something about an emergency license review." Thomas felt a chill run through him. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. He ended the call, turning to Sarah. "The veterinary board is at my clinic. This can't be a coincidence." "It's not," Sarah confirmed grimly. "Westfield has friends everywhere. Be careful what you say." The atmosphere at the clinic was tense when Thomas arrived. A stern-faced woman in a charcoal suit sat in his office, a leather portfolio open on her lap. Ellen hovered anxiously in the doorway, her usual cheerful demeanor replaced by worried glances. "Dr. Thomas Mitchell? I'm Amanda Pearson from the Virginia Veterinary Board. We've received a serious complaint about your practice." Her tone was professionally detached, but her eyes held something that looked almost like sympathy, specifically regarding the disposition of animals from Westfield Kennels. Thomas sat down slowly, mind racing. "What sort of complaint?" "Allegations that you've misappropriated animals brought for euthanasia," Specifically, a German Shepherd puppy delivered yesterday by Animal Control. She slid a document across the desk. We're initiating an immediate review of your license pending investigation. You're prohibited from practicing until the hearing, which is scheduled for 2 weeks from today. Thomas stared at the paper, recognizing the official letterhead of the veterinary board. After 40 years of unblemished practice, his career was being threatened because he'd finally done the right thing. This is ridiculous. I've done nothing wrong. Perhaps, Amanda said, her voice lowering slightly. But Richard Westfield has considerable influence with several board members. My advice? Get a good lawyer. She stood, gathering her portfolio. The clinic will need to close until the review is complete. After she left, Thomas sat in stunned silence. Ellen appeared in the doorway, her face pale. What's happening, Dr. Mitchell? Politics, Ellen, he said wearily. I need you to call all our appointments for the next 2 weeks and refer them to Dr. Sanderson in Mapleton. Then go home. I'll handle things from here. Once alone, Thomas began copying patient files, particularly those related to Westfield Kennels. He wasn't going down without a fight, and he needed evidence. As he worked, the front door chimed. Thomas glanced at the security monitor, freezing when he recognized the tall figure entering the reception area. Michael Mitchell stood awkwardly in the waiting room, looking so much like a younger version of himself that Thomas felt a pang of disorientation. His son's hair was shorter than he remembered, his build more substantial, but the resemblance to Margaret around the eyes was still striking. "Dad?" Michael said simply when Thomas emerged from his office. "We need to talk. 7 years without a visit, and now you show up?" Thomas couldn't keep the bitterness from his voice. "Let me guess. Richard Westfield sent you." Michael's expression tightened. "I work for Westfield Kennels. Marketing director for the past 3 years." The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. His own son, working for the man who was trying to destroy him. "So you're here to what? Convince me to lie down and take this? Return a dog that's being abused?" "I'm here because my boss is furious that his property has gone missing, and somehow you're involved." Michael's professional demeanor cracked slightly. "What are you doing, Dad? You're 68 years old. You're supposed to be winding down for retirement, not stealing dogs and making enemies of the most powerful man in the county." "Property?" Thomas repeated incredulously. "We're talking about a living creature that Westfield was going to kill because it wouldn't fight other dogs for sport." Michael's expression faltered. "What are you talking about? Scout bit Westfield's grandson. He showed me the hospital report. Did you see the actual bite, or just a report that could easily be fabricated?" Thomas countered, watching doubt flicker across his son's face. "Have you ever actually seen the back section of the kennels, Michael? Or do they keep the marketing director focused on the shiny front end of the operation?" "You don't know what you're talking about," Michael insisted, but there was uncertainty in his voice. "Mr. Westfield runs the most respected breeding program in 3 states. And an illegal dogfighting ring that makes 10 times the money," Thomas said flatly. "Scout is evidence of that operation. That's why Westfield wants him dead." Michael shook his head, but Thomas could see the seed of doubt taking root. His son wasn't stupid, just isolated from the truth, just as Thomas himself had been until yesterday. "Where is the dog, Dad?" Michael asked finally. "Safe, and that's all I'm going to say." Thomas stepped closer to his son, seeing not the marketing executive in an expensive suit, but the boy who had once helped him nurse injured wildlife back to health in their backyard. "Michael, I know we haven't been close since your mother died. That's my fault. I shut down. But I'm asking you now to trust me on this. Look into what's really happening at those kennels. Ask questions. See for yourself." For a moment, Thomas thought he saw a flicker of the old connection between them. Then Michael's professional mask slipped back into place. "Return the dog, Dad, before this gets worse. Westfield isn't someone you want as an enemy." As Michael turned to leave, Thomas called after him, "Your mother would have fought for that dog without a second thought." She never backed down from doing what was right, no matter who stood in her way. Michael paused at the door, his back stiffening. Without turning around, he said quietly, "Mom's been gone 7 years, Dad, and you checked out the day we buried her." Then he was gone, the bell above the door jingling with finality. Thomas sank into a waiting room chair, the weight of everything crashing down on him. His clinic shut down, his license suspended, his own son working for the enemy. In less than 24 hours, his carefully constructed life had completely unraveled. And yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, he felt more awake, more present than he had in years. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "They're watching your house. Don't go home. Come to 1825 Riverside Road. Scout is waiting." Thomas gathered the last of his files, turned off the lights of his clinic, and locked the door, wondering if he would ever practice medicine there again. As he walked to his car, he noticed a black SUV parked across the street, the driver making no attempt to hide his surveillance. The game had changed, and Thomas Mitchell, a man who had spent 7 years avoiding life, suddenly found himself fighting for it. The address Sarah had given Thomas led to a modest farmhouse at the edge of town, set back from the road behind a screen of maple trees. As he pulled into the gravel driveway, headlights briefly illuminating a weathered barn, Thomas felt a strange sense of familiarity. This had been the Collins family property decades ago. He'd treated their horses and cattle when he first started practicing in Pine Ridge. Sarah appeared on the porch before he could knock, silently motioning him inside. The farmhouse interior was simply furnished but comfortable, with worn leather furniture and handmade quilts giving it a lived-in warmth that Thomas's own home had lacked since Margaret's passing. "Scout's in the back room," Sarah said, leading him through the house. "He was anxious when we moved him, but he's settling in." The German Shepherd puppy was curled up on a plaid dog bed, ears perking up immediately when Thomas entered. A small whine escaped him as he rose, tail wagging tentatively. Without thinking, Thomas knelt down, allowing Scout to approach at his own pace. The dog pressed his head against Thomas's hand, amber eyes looking up with what seemed like recognition. "He remembers you," Sarah observed, leaning against the doorframe. "That's unusual for a dog that's been through trauma. They typically don't trust easily." Thomas felt something warm and foreign spread through his chest. Connection, he realized, something he'd been avoiding for 7 long years. "Michael came to see me at the clinic," he said, still petting Scout. "He works for Westfield. Marketing director." Sarah's expression tightened. "Did you tell him about Scout?" "I didn't tell him where the dog is. But I told him enough to make him question what's happening at those kennels." Thomas straightened, wincing as his knees protested. "I'm not sure if he believed me." "Westfield is careful about compartmentalizing his operation," Sarah replied, leading Thomas back to the kitchen where she poured them both coffee. "The legitimate side is kept completely separate from the fighting ring. Only his most trusted people have access to both worlds." Thomas took the mug gratefully, the warmth seeping into his cold hands. "What happens now? I've lost my practice, my reputation is being dismantled, and Westfield's men are watching my house, all for one dog." "Not just for one dog," Sarah corrected. "For all the dogs you couldn't save before, for the dozens more that will die if Westfield's operation continues." She pulled out a chair, sitting across from him. "Tell me, Dr. Mitchell, why did you really save Scout? After ignoring the signs for so many years, why this dog? Why now?" The question caught Thomas off guard. He thought about that moment in the exam room when Scout had placed his paw on his hand. "I don't know," he admitted. "Something broke through, or maybe something broke open." Sarah studied him for a long moment. "You lost your wife, 7 years ago?" 7 years, 2 months, and 14 days, Thomas answered automatically, the count so ingrained he didn't need to think about it. And that's when the pattern of Westfield's euthanasia requests began to increase, Sarah noted, sliding a spreadsheet across the table. Almost as if someone noticed your vulnerability, your emotional detachment, your willingness to follow procedure without asking questions. Thomas stared at the dates, the correlation undeniable. Westfield had begun bringing more dogs for euthanasia shortly after Margaret's funeral. Had the man deliberately targeted him, knowing grief had made him less likely to look closely? The thought made him feel physically ill. "I need to visit Margaret," Thomas said suddenly, standing up. "I need to talk to her." Sarah looked confused. "Dr. Mitchell, her grave," Thomas clarified. "I go every Sunday morning. It's the only routine I've kept since she died. If I don't show up tomorrow, Westfield will know something's wrong." "It's too risky," Sarah protested. "They're watching you." "Exactly. And they'll be more suspicious if I change my patterns." Thomas felt a strange calm settling over him. "Besides, I need to tell her what's happening. She always saw things more clearly than I did." Sarah seemed to understand this wasn't a point she could argue. "Be careful. Don't talk to anyone, and come straight back here afterward." She hesitated, then added, "Scout seems to help with your grief. That connection is healing for both of you." Thomas glanced toward the back room where Scout had fallen asleep again. "I haven't allowed myself to connect with anything since Margaret died. Not patients, not friends, certainly not my son." He sighed, feeling the weight of years of emotional isolation. "It took a condemned dog to wake me up." That night, Thomas slept on Sarah's couch, Scout curled up on the floor beside him. For the first time in years, no nightmares invaded his sleep. Morning brought watery sunshine and the ritual Thomas had maintained every Sunday since Margaret's death. The cemetery was peaceful, dew still clinging to the grass as Thomas made his way to the familiar granite headstone beneath a maple tree. He knelt carefully, placing a small bouquet of wildflowers, Margaret's favorite, against the stone. "I've made a mess of things, Maggie," he said quietly, tracing the engraved letters of her name. "But I think I'm finally waking up." He told her about Scout, about Westfield's operation, about his estrangement from Michael. Words flowed easier here than anywhere else, as if some part of him believed she could really hear him. "I don't know if I can fix this. Westfield has too much power, too many connections. But I have to try." Thomas wiped moisture from his eyes. "You always said I'd lose myself in procedure if I wasn't careful. You were right. I stopped seeing the animals, stopped connecting, just like I stopped seeing everything else after you were gone." From the corner of his eye, Thomas noticed a groundskeeper watching him from a distance. The man spoke briefly into a radio, then turned away. Westfield's surveillance, no doubt. Thomas finished his one-sided conversation quickly, promising Margaret he would return when it was over, one way or another. Back at Sarah's farmhouse, Thomas found her in intense discussion with a man he recognized as Detective Frank Henderson from the county sheriff's office. Both fell silent when he entered. "It's okay," Sarah assured him. "Frank's here to help. He's been suspicious of Westfield for years but never had enough evidence to move against him." Henderson nodded, his weathered face serious. "Dr. Mitchell, Sarah's been filling me in on your situation. Suspending your license was a low move even for Westfield." "Can you help us?" Thomas asked, Scout padding into the room to press against his leg. "Officially?" "My hands are tied. The sheriff's department can't investigate based only on your word against Westfield's." "Unofficially?" Henderson glanced at Sarah, some unspoken communication passing between them. "I can give you information. Westfield's hosting one of his private events at the kennels next Saturday night. VIPs only. Invitations strictly required." "The fighting matches," Sarah explained. "Every few months he brings in clients from across the country. Wealthy people who bet thousands on dogs trained to kill each other." Thomas felt physically ill at the thought. And the authorities just ignore this? Henderson's expression hardened. The county commissioner and our sheriff play golf with Westfield every Wednesday. Half the department's equipment was donated by him. No one wants to look too closely at their benefactor. So we're on our own, Thomas concluded. Not entirely, Henderson countered. I can't officially investigate, but I can tell you exactly when the security shifts change at Westfield Kennels. I can tell you which guards might look the other way. And I can make sure certain roads don't have patrols on Saturday night. It was a risk for the detective to help them, Thomas realized. Why are you doing this? Henderson's eyes darkened. My daughter's German Shepherd disappeared 3 years ago. Jumped the fence, I thought. 2 weeks later, I saw him in one of Westfield's training videos. By the time I found out, it was too late. He looked at Scout, who had settled at Thomas's feet. Sometimes the system fails, Dr. Mitchell. Sometimes good people have to work outside it. After Henderson left, Thomas and Sarah began planning. The private event would be their best opportunity to gather concrete evidence of Westfield's operation, photographs, videos, financial records. Enough to force an official investigation, even with Westfield's connections. It's dangerous, Sarah warned. If we're caught, Westfield won't just threaten your license. He's not above violence to protect his business. Thomas nodded, scratching Scout behind the ears. The puppy had barely left his side all day, as if sensing Thomas's need for companionship. I understand the risk, but I can't walk away from this. Not anymore. That evening, as they finalized their plans, Thomas's phone rang, Michael's number flashing on the screen. After a moment's hesitation, he answered. Dad? Michael's voice sounded strained. Where are you? I went by the house, but you weren't there. I'm somewhere safe, Thomas replied cautiously. Why are you looking for me? A pause. I did what you said. I asked questions. I looked into areas of the kennels I'd never seen before. Michael's voice dropped to almost a whisper. You were right, about everything. The fighting ring, the training methods, all of it. Dad, what have I been part of? Thomas closed his eyes, relief washing over him. It's not your fault, son. Westfield is good at keeping people in the dark. He's looking for you, Dad. He's furious about the dog. You need to be careful. The fear in Michael's voice was palpable. He has people watching your house, the clinic, even Mom's grave. I know, Thomas said gently. Michael, I need you to listen carefully. Don't confront Westfield. Act normal. We're gathering evidence to expose him, but we need more time. We? Michael sounded confused. Who's helping you? Thomas hesitated, not wanting to put anyone else at risk. Friends, people who care about what's happening to these animals. Let me help, Michael insisted. I have access to files, computer records. I can get you information from the inside. The offer surprised Thomas. After 7 years of distance, this sudden desire to reconnect, to help, seemed almost too good to be true. It's too dangerous, Michael. If Westfield suspects you're helping me. Dad, Michael interrupted, his voice steadier now. I've spent 7 years running from everything that mattered. From you, from Mom's memory, from myself. I need to do this. Let me help make this right. Thomas thought of Margaret, of how she would have been the first to forgive their son's absence, the first to welcome him back. Be careful, he said finally. And Michael, thank you. After ending the call, Thomas found Sarah watching him, her expression unreadable. Can we trust him? She asked. He's my son, Thomas replied simply. That's not an answer, Sarah countered. Westfield is manipulative. What if this is a trap? Thomas looked down at Scout, who had fallen asleep against his foot, trusting and vulnerable. 7 years ago, I lost my wife. Then I lost my son. Then I lost myself. He met Sarah's gaze steadily. I'm done losing things I care about. Michael deserves a chance to make things right. We all do. As night fell, Thomas sat on Sarah's porch, Scout beside him, both of them watching the stars appear one by one. For the first time in years, he felt purposeful, alive. Tomorrow they would begin gathering the evidence needed to bring down Richard Westfield's empire of cruelty. The path ahead was dangerous, but Thomas Mitchell, a man who had spent 7 years merely existing, was finally ready to live again. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy tension hanging in the air. Thomas stood at Sarah's kitchen window, watching the sun sink below the tree line, painting the sky in shades of orange and deep purple. Scout sat at his feet, occasionally nudging his leg with a muzzle that seemed to sense the anxiety radiating from his new protector. "It's time," Sarah said, entering the room. Gone was her usual casual attire, replaced by dark clothing suitable for moving unnoticed in the night. She placed a small backpack on the table, revealing its contents: flashlights, a digital camera with night vision capability, portable voice recorders, and gloves. Detective Henderson confirmed the schedule. The security rotation changes at 9:30. We'll have approximately 20 minutes while the new guards do their first perimeter check. Thomas nodded, checking his watch, an old Timex that Margaret had given him on their 20th anniversary. Its familiar weight on his wrist had always been comforting, a constant reminder of her presence. Tonight, it felt like a talisman of protection. Michael texted the access code for the employee entrance, Thomas said, showing Sarah his phone. He says most of the guests will be in the main house for drinks before the matches begin. The kennels should be minimally guarded. Sarah's expression remained skeptical. "I still don't fully trust this sudden change of heart from your son." "I understand your concern," Thomas replied, kneeling to attach a new collar to Scout, one without identification. "But Michael knows the consequences if this is a trap. He'd be losing his father all over again." The plan was straightforward but dangerous. While Westfield entertained his wealthy clients, Thomas and Sarah would infiltrate the restricted kennel area, documenting the fighting pits, training equipment, and most importantly, the injured animals. Michael had provided information about the computer system, which contained financial records of bets placed and inventory logs of fighting dogs. With enough evidence, even Westfield's connections couldn't protect him. "What about Scout?" Sarah asked, glancing at the German shepherd who hadn't left Thomas's side all day. "He stays here," Thomas said firmly. "He's been through enough." They secured Scout in Sarah's bedroom with fresh water, toys, and an old shirt of Thomas's for comfort. The puppy whined as they closed the door, his amber eyes following Thomas with an intelligence that still surprised him. "We'll be back soon, boy," Thomas promised, knowing how empty such assurances must sound to a dog who had already experienced so much betrayal. The drive to Westfield Kennels took 20 minutes, their headlights off for the final approach along a seldom-used access road Henderson had told them about. They parked behind a stand of pine trees and continued on foot, guided by the soft glow of distant lights from the main house. Through the trees, Thomas could make out the silhouettes of expensive cars lining the circular driveway: Bentleys, Porsches, Mercedes, the vehicles of people wealthy enough to indulge in Westfield's cruel entertainment without fear of consequences. "This way," Sarah whispered, guiding them toward a long, low building set apart from the main house. Unlike the elegant facade of Westfield's Showplace Kennels, where he housed his champion breeding stock, this structure was utilitarian, with small, high windows and heavy doors. The restricted area is through that service entrance. Thomas's heart pounded as they approached, every sense heightened. The distant sound of laughter and clinking glasses carried from the main house where Westfield's guests were gathering. Closer, he could hear the more disturbing sounds of dogs, not the casual barking of kennel animals, but the high-strung whines and growls of creatures under stress. The keypad lock yielded to Michael's code, the door swinging open to reveal a dimly lit corridor lined with kennels. The smell hit Thomas immediately, the sharp tang of bleach barely masking the underlying sense of blood, fear, and neglect. Sarah quickly closed the door behind them, plunging them into relative darkness broken only by emergency exit signs. "Camera," she whispered, handing him the night vision device. "Document everything." Thomas moved methodically down the line of kennels, photographing each occupied cage. Unlike the spacious, comfortable accommodations Westfield showcased to visitors, these were bare-bones containment units designed for a single purpose: to house fighting dogs between matches. Many of the animals bore fresh wounds, their muscular bodies scarred from previous fights. Some paced nervously, while others lay listless in corners. "These aren't just German shepherds," Thomas noted, recognizing several other breeds specialized for fighting: pit bulls, Dobermans, even a few breeds he couldn't immediately identify. "He's running a full operation." "The specialized breeds go to the serious gamblers," Sarah explained, her voice tight with controlled anger. "The shepherds are his signature line, his innovation in the fighting world." At the end of the corridor, a heavy metal door led to what Michael had described as the performance area. Thomas pushed it open cautiously, revealing a large circular pit surrounded by tiered seating, a miniature coliseum designed for blood sport. The sandy floor of the pit was stained dark in places, despite obvious attempts to clean it. "Start copying files," Thomas told Sarah, pointing to a computer workstation in a glass-enclosed office overlooking the pit. "I'll finish documenting the kennels." As Sarah worked on accessing the financial records, Thomas continued photographing the facility: training equipment designed to enhance aggression, medical supplies for patching up valuable fighters between matches, even a separate disposal area where losing dogs presumably met their end. With each discovery, his determination grew. This wasn't just about Scout anymore. It was about every animal that had suffered in this hell. Thomas was photographing a cabinet of performance-enhancing drugs when he heard a sound that froze his blood: the main door opening, followed by voices. He quickly switched off his flashlight, pressing himself against the wall. "Just checking the inventory before the main event," a man's voice said, one Thomas didn't recognize. "Mr. Westfield wants to make sure the Johnson dog is prepped and ready." "That shepherd with the white chest marking? Mean bastard," a second voice replied. "Killed 2 dogs last month without breaking a sweat." Thomas held his breath as footsteps approached, praying Sarah had heard the warning and hidden herself. The footsteps paused at a kennel close to his position. "This one's ready to go, full of fight," the first voice commented. "Let's check the pit setup." As the footsteps moved away, Thomas exhaled silently, edging toward the office where Sarah had been working. He found her crouched beneath the desk, a USB drive clutched in her hand, her eyes wide with tension. "We need to go," she mouthed silently. "Now." They retraced their steps carefully, freezing when voices echoed from the main entrance, more people arriving, the sound of the party shifting from the house to the fighting venue. The exit they'd used was no longer viable. "Emergency exit," Sarah whispered, pointing to a glowing red sign at the far end of the kennel corridor. "It'll trigger an alarm, but we'll have a head start." They were halfway to the exit when disaster struck. A door opened ahead of them, light spilling into the corridor, silhouetting their figures for anyone to see. Thomas squinted against the sudden brightness, his heart stopping when he recognized the tall figure standing in the doorway. Richard Westfield. "Dr. Mitchell," Westfield said, his voice deceptively calm. What an unexpected surprise. He stepped fully into the corridor, revealing 2 security guards flanking him. "Though perhaps not entirely unexpected, my head of security thought our perimeter had been breached." Thomas straightened, placing himself slightly in front of Sarah. "It's over, Westfield. We have everything we need: photos, financial records, documentation of your entire operation." Westfield's smile never reached his eyes. "What operation would that be, Doctor? My nationally recognized breeding program?" My charity work providing service dogs to veterans. He gestured around them. This is simply the quarantine area for new acquisitions, standard practice in any responsible kennel. Save it for the authorities, Sarah snapped, the USB drive now hidden in her pocket. The evidence speaks for itself. Ah, Miss Collins, still harboring resentment over your termination, I see. Westfield sighed theatrically. Trespassing, breaking and entering, theft of property, slander. The list of charges against you both is quite extensive. He nodded to one of the guards. Call the sheriff. Tell him we've apprehended intruders. Thomas felt a cold certainty settle over him. Westfield's connections would ensure any evidence they'd gathered would disappear before it reached legitimate authorities. Your grandson was never bitten, was he? He asked quietly. That was just an excuse to get rid of Scout because he wouldn't fight. Something flashed in Westfield's eyes, surprise perhaps, that Thomas had pieced it together. That dog was defective, a disappointment. His mask of civility slipped slightly. Just like all your efforts tonight, a disappointment and ultimately futile. A commotion from the main entrance interrupted their standoff, raised voices, the sound of running feet. Michael burst into the corridor, his face flushed, his tie askew as if he'd been running. "Dad!" he called out, then froze, taking in the scene before him. "Mr. Westfield, what's happening?" Westfield's expression hardened. "Michael, I see family loyalty has won out after all. Disappointing, but not surprising." He turned to the security guards. "Detain all 3 of them. The sheriff can sort this out." But Michael wasn't looking at Westfield anymore. His attention had shifted to the kennels behind them, his expression morphing from confusion to horror as he truly saw the conditions for the first time. "What is this?" he whispered. "These dogs. They're injured, fighting wounds." "Nothing for you to concern yourself with," Westfield said dismissively. "These animals are being rehabilitated after territorial disputes. Standard procedure." Michael moved further into the corridor, peering into kennels. Rehabilitated? With fight training equipment? With betting ledgers? He turned to his employer, betrayal written across his features. "I believed in you. I defended you to my father." "Your father is a sentimental old fool who should have minded his own business," Westfield snapped, his composure finally cracking. "And you're naive if you think anything you've discovered here tonight will see the light of day. Do you know who's in my house right now? The district attorney, the county commissioner, 2 state judges. People who understand the way the world really works." The security guards moved forward, but Michael stepped between them and his father. "Don't touch him," he warned, his voice dropping to a dangerous register Thomas had never heard from his son before. Westfield's face flushed with anger. "You're making a serious mistake, Michael. Your career, your future." "My future was never with someone who tortures animals for profit," Michael interrupted. "You're finished, Mr. Westfield, whether you know it yet or not." The standoff might have continued indefinitely if not for the sudden wail of sirens outside. Not the single patrol car Westfield had summoned, but multiple vehicles, their lights painting the kennels in alternating red and blue through the high windows. "What the hell?" one of the guards muttered, moving to a window. "There's state police out there. And is that FBI?" The color drained from Westfield's face. "Impossible," he whispered. "Call them off," he ordered the guard. "Use the back channels. This is a misunderstanding." But the guard was shaking his head. "They're already in the main house, sir. They're detaining everyone." Thomas felt a surge of hope, but confusion as well. This wasn't part of their plan. Who had called in state authorities? His question was answered when Detective Henderson strode into the kennel, accompanied by 2 uniformed state troopers and a woman in an FBI windbreaker. "Richard Westfield," Henderson announced formally. "You're under arrest for illegal gambling operations, animal cruelty, fraud, and racketeering under the RICO Act." He nodded to Thomas and Sarah. "Dr. Mitchell, Ms. Collins, glad to see you're safe." "What is this?" Thomas asked as the troopers handcuffed a sputtering Westfield. Henderson's weathered face broke into a rare smile. "Let's just say when your son reached out with evidence of interstate gambling operations and cruelty violations, we found some federal colleagues who were very interested. Colleagues beyond Westfield's sphere of influence." Thomas turned to Michael in shock. "You contacted the FBI?" Michael shrugged, looking both proud and slightly embarrassed. "I figured if Westfield owned the local authorities, we needed to go above their heads. When I found the financial records connecting his operation to fighting rings in 3 states, it became a federal issue." As Westfield was led away, still protesting his innocence and threatening lawsuits, Thomas felt something he hadn't experienced in 7 years. A profound sense of rightness, of justice being served. He placed a hand on Michael's shoulder, words failing him in the moment. "I know, Dad," Michael said quietly. "I wish Mom could see this." "She can," Thomas replied, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. For the first time since Margaret's death, he truly believed she was watching over them. The next hours passed in a blur of statements, evidence collection, and coordination with authorities. The fighting dogs were documented, examined, and transferred to emergency veterinary care. Westfield's guests, many of them prominent community figures, were detained for questioning, their expensive cars impounded as evidence. Dawn was breaking as Thomas, Michael, and Sarah finally left the kennels, exhausted but triumphant. Henderson approached them in the parking lot, his expression serious despite their victory. "You should know," he said. "Westfield made a call before we could stop him, to someone at your address." He looked at Sarah. "Someone was dispatched there. We've sent officers, but—" Thomas felt his heart drop. "Scout," he whispered, already running toward their car. "We need to get back." Now. The drive back to Sarah's farmhouse was the longest of Thomas's life. Every second stretching into eternity as he imagined Scout, alone, defenseless, facing whoever Westfield had sent. They weren't just dealing with a man protecting his business anymore. They were dealing with someone whose empire was crumbling, who had nothing left to lose. As they turned onto Sarah's road, Thomas saw the patrol car Henderson had sent, its lights flashing in the early morning light. But something was wrong. The front door of the farmhouse stood open, swinging gently in the breeze. "Stay in the car," Thomas ordered Michael, but his son ignored him, both of them racing toward the house with Sarah close behind. Inside, the living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, a lamp shattered on the floor. The bedroom door where they'd left Scout had been forced open. Thomas called out for the dog, panic rising in his throat when no answering bark came. They found the responding officer unconscious in the kitchen, a nasty gash on his forehead but still breathing. And through the broken back door, they could see a large man dragging something toward a waiting truck, a struggling, whimpering bundle that Thomas recognized immediately. "Scout!" he shouted, running toward them without thought for his own safety. The man turned, revealing a face Thomas recognized as one of Westfield's security guards. In one hand he held a syringe, in the other, Scout's scruff. "Stop right there," the man growled, holding the syringe threateningly close to Scout's neck. "This dog is Westfield property, always has been." Thomas slowed, hands raised placatingly. "Let him go. It's over. Westfield's been arrested. The fighting ring is shut down." "Doesn't matter," the man replied, his expression hard. "Orders are orders. This dog doesn't leave alive. Too much evidence in his scars, in his training history." Thomas took another careful step forward. "Please, he's just a puppy. He never hurt anyone." "That's the problem, isn't it?" the man sneered. "All that potential, all that breeding, and he wouldn't fight. A disappointment." The words echoed Westfield's earlier assessment, chilling Thomas to the bone. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. The security guard raised the syringe, preparing to plunge it into Scout's neck. Thomas lunged forward desperately, knowing he wouldn't reach them in time. From the corner of his eye, he saw Michael racing toward them from the side. And then pain exploded in Thomas's chest, crushing, vice-like pain that radiated down his left arm. His vision tunneled, darkness creeping in at the edges. The last thing he saw before collapsing was Scout, somehow breaking free, his teeth clamped around the guard's wrist as Michael tackled the man to the ground. Then darkness claimed him, and Thomas Mitchell, who had only recently found reasons to live again, felt himself slipping away, beeping. Rhythmic, insistent beeping penetrated the darkness surrounding Thomas. His body felt distant, disconnected, as if he were floating just above it rather than inhabiting it fully. Voices drifted in and out, unfamiliar medical terminology, worried questions, reassurances too muted to comprehend. "Dad?" Michael's voice, closer than the others. "Dad, can you hear me?" Thomas struggled to open his eyes, the simple act requiring monumental effort. When he finally succeeded, harsh, fluorescent light assaulted his vision, causing him to wince. A hospital room gradually came into focus. Sterile white walls, monitoring equipment, the antiseptic smell he'd associated with illness and death since Margaret's final days. "He's waking up," Michael called to someone outside Thomas's field of vision. "Get the doctor." Thomas tried to speak, but his throat felt parched, raw. A straw appeared at his lips, and he sipped gratefully, cool water soothing the dryness. "Scout," he managed finally, the word barely audible. "Where's Scout?" Michael's face relaxed slightly, relief evident in his expression. "Scout's safe, Dad. Sarah has him at her place. He actually—" Michael's voice caught. "He saved your life." Fragments of memory returned. The confrontation with Westfield's man, the syringe, the crushing pain in his chest. "Heart attack?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. "Massive myocardial infarction," confirmed a new voice. A doctor in her 50s entered Thomas's line of sight, reviewing the monitors with practiced efficiency. "You're lucky to be alive, Dr. Mitchell. If your son and that dog hadn't responded so quickly, we wouldn't be having this conversation." "The dog?" Thomas asked, confusion evident in his voice. Michael leaned closer. "When you collapsed, Scout broke free and ran to you. He started barking like crazy, circling you, licking your face. Sarah said he was trying to keep you conscious, keep your heart rate up until help arrived." He shook his head, still seeming amazed. "The paramedics said those extra minutes of blood circulation might have made all the difference." Thomas closed his eyes, overwhelmed by emotion. The German shepherd he'd saved had somehow returned the favor. And Westfield's man? "In custody," Michael assured him. "Charged with assault, animal cruelty, attempted murder. The list keeps growing. Detective Henderson says he's cooperating, giving up information about Westfield's entire operation in exchange for leniency." The doctor checked Thomas's vitals, made notes on his chart. "You need rest, Dr. Mitchell. No excitement, no visitors, except immediate family for the next 48 hours. She gave Michael a pointed look. 10 more minutes, then out. After she left, Thomas reached for his son's hand, noticing the IV in his own arm for the first time. What happened with Westfield? "The fighting ring? It's over," Michael said, squeezing his father's hand gently. "The FBI raided 3 more locations based on the evidence we gathered. 42 dogs rescued so far, and Westfield's connections can't help him this time, not with federal charges and media attention." He hesitated, then added, "Your veterinary license has been reinstated, by the way. The board issued a formal apology when they realized how Westfield had manipulated them." Thomas nodded. too exhausted to feel the vindication he might have expected. Sarah? She's been coordinating with rescue organizations finding placements for the fighting dogs. The ones that can be rehabilitated anyway. Michael's expression darkened. Some are too far gone, too traumatized. Those decisions are being left to her and the other veterinarians. She thought you wouldn't want to make those calls when you're recovering. Thomas felt a surge of gratitude for Sarah's understanding. After decades of following protocol without question, making those euthanasia decisions now, with his heart and conscience fully engaged, would be agonizing. "There's something else you should know," Michael continued, his voice tentative. "Mom's roses, the ones in the garden at home, they're dying. I think they've been neglected too long." The statement might have seemed non sequitur to anyone else, but Thomas understood immediately. Margaret's prize roses, which he'd maintained meticulously for 7 years as a form of penance, of connection to her memory. He'd been away from home for days now, the longest he'd been absent from that garden since her death. "Let them go," Thomas whispered, surprising both Michael and himself. "Your mother always said gardens need renewal. Old growth makes way for new." Michael's eyes widened slightly at this unexpected response. For 7 years, Thomas had kept Margaret's garden exactly as she'd left it, treating each wilted petal like a personal failure. This willingness to let go represented a seismic shift. "Dad, Michael began, but was interrupted by a nurse entering to check Thomas's medication. "Time's up," she announced, adjusting Thomas's IV. "Your father needs rest. You can come back tomorrow." Michael nodded reluctantly, gathering his jacket. "I'll be back first thing in the morning," he promised. "And maybe we can talk about bringing Scout for a visit. The doctors might make an exception for the dog that saved your life." As the medication took effect, pulling Thomas back toward sleep, he felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in years. Despite the physical pain, despite the tubes and monitors, despite the sterile hospital room so reminiscent of where he'd lost Margaret, Thomas Mitchell felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. 2 days passed in a haze of tests, medications, and brief, carefully monitored visits from Michael. Thomas learned more details about Westfield's operation, how the man had leveraged his legitimate breeding business to create a nationwide network of dog-fighting venues catering to wealthy clients. The investigation had expanded to include animal trafficking across state lines, illegal gambling, money laundering, and even blackmail. Westfield's carefully constructed facade had collapsed completely, revealing the monster beneath. On the 3rd morning, Thomas awoke to find Sarah sitting beside his bed instead of Michael, her expression a mixture of concern and determination. "You look terrible," she said bluntly, the ghost of a smile softening her words. "I feel terrible," Thomas admitted, adjusting his position slightly to ease the persistent ache in his chest. "But alive, thanks to you and Michael. And Scout." Sarah nodded, her fingers fidgeting with the strap of her bag, a nervous gesture he hadn't seen from her before. "The doctors say you're stable, recovering well, considering." She paused, seeming to gather her thoughts. "Thomas, there's something we need to discuss. About Scout." Alarm surged through Thomas, causing the heart monitor to spike. "Is he okay? Did something happen?" "He's fine," Sarah assured him quickly. "Physically, at least. But emotionally, he's not doing well being separated from you. He barely eats, doesn't play, just lies by the door waiting." She met his eyes directly. "The bond between you is something special, something I've rarely seen develop so quickly between human and animal." Relief washed over Thomas, followed by a complicated warmth at the thought of Scout missing him. "I miss him too," he admitted. "More than I expected." "There's a problem, though," Sarah continued, her expression growing more serious. "The dogs rescued from Westfield's operation, including Scout, are technically evidence in a federal case. Once the investigation concludes, they'll be evaluated and, if possible, placed in appropriate homes. If possible? Thomas repeated, not liking the implication. Sarah sighed, the weight of her work with the rescued animals evident in the new lines around her eyes. Many of these dogs will never be suitable for family homes, Thomas. The psychological damage is too severe. We're working with specialized sanctuaries, but resources are limited. And Scout? Thomas asked, though he already knew where this conversation was heading. Scout is young enough, resilient enough to have a normal life, but he needs stability, consistency, someone who understands his background. Sarah took a deep breath. I've spoken with the federal prosecutor. Given the circumstances, your role in exposing Westfield, Scout's attachment to you, they might consider a conditional release of Scout into your custody. Thomas felt hope rising, but Sarah's expression remained guarded. What's the catch? Your health, she said simply. You've just suffered a major heart attack. You live alone. The prosecutor needs assurance that you can provide proper care, that Scout won't be neglected or abandoned if your condition worsens. The implications stung, but Thomas understood the concern. Scout had already experienced abandonment and abuse. The system was designed to prevent further trauma. What do I need to do? He asked, determination hardening his voice. Get better, Sarah replied. Follow your treatment plan. And, she hesitated, consider whether living alone is still the best option. The prosecutor would look more favorably on a home environment with multiple caregivers. Before Thomas could respond, a nurse entered to check his vitals, effectively ending the conversation. Sarah promised to return the following day, leaving Thomas alone with thoughts that churned like autumn leaves in a windstorm. Living alone had been his choice after Margaret died, his penance, his cocoon of grief. The house remained frozen in time, a shrine to what he'd lost rather than a home for the living. Could he change that now? Should he? That afternoon, Michael arrived with unexpected news. I've given notice at my apartment, he announced without preamble. I'm moving back to Pine Ridge. Thomas stared at his son, wondering if the medication was causing hallucinations. What about your job? Your life in Richmond? Michael shrugged, an echo of the teenage gesture Thomas remembered from years ago. I've been offered a position with the state's Animal Welfare Division. They need someone familiar with breeding operations, someone who can help identify illegal fighting kennels. A hint of pride crept into his voice. Apparently, helping bring down one of the largest dogfighting rings in the region looks good on a resume. That's wonderful, Thomas said sincerely. But where will you live? Pine Ridge isn't exactly known for its rental opportunities. Michael met his father's gaze steadily. I thought I might stay at the house for a while, if that's okay with you. The house. Margaret's shrine. The place Thomas had both hidden within and hidden from for 7 years. He thought of Scout, of the prosecutor's concerns about his living situation, of Sarah's carefully worded suggestion. It's more than okay, Thomas replied, his voice rough with emotion. It's your home too, Michael. It always has been. Something shifted between them in that moment, a wall crumbling, a bridge beginning to form across 7 years of estrangement. Michael reached for his father's hand, a gesture so reminiscent of his childhood that Thomas felt his eyes fill with unexpected tears. I miss her too, Dad, Michael said quietly. Every day. But I think Mom would want us to live, not just remember. Thomas nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. Margaret would have kicked him squarely in the shins years ago if she'd seen how he'd retreated from life after her death. She had been the one who taught him that loving meant risking loss, a lesson he'd forgotten in his grief. Later that evening, alone in his hospital room, Thomas found himself talking to Margaret as if she were sitting beside him. He told her about Scout, about Westfield's operation, about reconnecting with their son. He told her how tired he was of living half a life, how ready he felt to honor her memory by truly living again. "I think I'm finally ready to let you go, Maggie," he whispered into the quiet room. "Not forget you. Never that. But to stop using your memory as a shield against feeling anything else." The cardiac monitor beside his bed beeped steadily, the only response to his confession. Yet Thomas felt a sense of peace settle over him, as if Margaret had heard and understood. The next morning brought more visitors. Detective Henderson with an update on the case, a federal agent with questions about Westfield's operation, even Ellen from the clinic, bringing flowers and news that patients were already asking when Dr. Mitchell would return to work. Thomas answered questions, made polite conversation, but his mind remained focused on the visit he was truly waiting for. When Sarah finally arrived in the late afternoon, Thomas's heart lifted at the sight of the leash in her hand. "Special delivery," she announced, opening the door wider to reveal Scout sitting patiently in the hallway, a bright red therapy dog vest fitted neatly over his growing frame. The hospital administrator agreed to a special exception. Apparently, dogs that save lives get special privileges. Scout entered the room cautiously, his amber eyes fixed on Thomas with an intensity that seemed almost human in its focus. For a moment, dog and man simply looked at each other, reconnecting across the days of separation. "Come here, boy," Thomas called softly, patting the edge of the bed. Scout needed no further invitation. With a small whine of recognition, he approached the bed, his tail wagging tentatively. Thomas extended his hand, and Scout pressed his muzzle against it. Not the desperate plea of their first meeting, but a greeting between friends, between family. "I missed you too," Thomas murmured, scratching behind Scout's ears. The simple contact seemed to release something in both of them. Scout's entire body relaxed, his tail wagging more confidently, while Thomas felt the last hard edges of his grief beginning to soften and transform. Sarah watched the reunion with a smile, though her eyes remained serious. "The prosecutor's office is considering your application for Scout's conditional release. Michael's decision to move home helps your case significantly." Thomas nodded, still focused on Scout, who had settled his head on the edge of the bed as close to Thomas as the medical equipment would allow. "And if they approve?" "Scout would legally be yours with some stipulations about his care and regular check-ins with animal welfare officials." Sarah hesitated, then added, "They'll need to know your long-term plans, for the clinic, for your practice, for your life." The question hung in the air between them. Thomas had spent 7 years without a plan beyond maintaining the status quo, preserving Margaret's memory by freezing his own life in place. Now, facing his own mortality, reconnecting with his son, finding unexpected purpose in saving Scout, everything had changed. "I'm not sure yet," Thomas admitted. "The practice, the house, it all needs to be reimagined." He looked at Scout, at the trust evident in those amber eyes. "But I know Scout will be part of it. We saved each other, I think." Sarah's expression softened. The prosecutor also mentioned that having a professional familiar with animal behavior involved in Scout's care would strengthen your application. Someone who could help with his ongoing rehabilitation. Thomas caught her meaning immediately. "Someone like you?" A faint blush colored Sarah's cheeks. "I've been offered a position with the Regional Animal Welfare Office, coordinating rehabilitation for the dogs rescued from Westfield's operation." She met his gaze directly. "It would mean staying in Pine Ridge, being involved in Scout's care, seeing you regularly." The possibility hung between them, not romance, not yet, but connection, purpose, a shared mission. For a man who had spent 7 years avoiding attachments, it should have felt threatening. Instead, Thomas found himself welcoming the idea of Sarah's continued presence in his life, in Scout's life. "I'd like that," he said simply. Scout shifted, placing one paw deliberately on Thomas's arm, the same gesture that had started everything in the examination room. This time, though, it wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a connection, an affirmation. As Thomas looked from Scout to Sarah, then thought of Michael returning home, he realized that his heart attack, as terrifying and painful as it had been, had given him something invaluable, a second chance. An opportunity to build a life based not on grief and memory, but on compassion, connection, and purpose. For the first time in 7 years, Thomas Mitchell found himself looking forward to tomorrow. The morning sun streamed through the hospital window, painting Thomas's room in a warm, golden light. 6 days after his heart attack, the doctors had finally agreed to discharge him, though with strict instructions about medication, diet, and physical activity. Michael stood by the bed, packing the few personal items that had accumulated during Thomas's stay: a worn paperback Western, reading glasses, a cardigan that Ellen had brought from the house. "Everything's ready at home," Michael said, folding the sweater carefully. "I've set up the downstairs guest room so you won't have to tackle the stairs. Mrs. Henderson from next door brought over enough casseroles to feed an army, and Sarah helped me rearrange the furniture to make wider pathways." Thomas nodded, feeling both grateful and slightly overwhelmed by the changes happening in his absence. The house, Margaret's house, was being transformed without his direct involvement. A week ago, this would have sent him into a spiral of anxiety and resistance. Now he found himself curious, even eager to see how his son had reimagined their shared space. "And Scout?" Thomas asked, the question that had been foremost in his mind since waking. Michael smiled, recognizing the priority in his father's voice. "Sarah brought him over yesterday. He inspected every inch of the house, then settled in your study like he's lived there all his life. I swear he knows you're coming home today." A nurse entered with a wheelchair, hospital policy for discharge despite Thomas's protests that he could walk perfectly well. As they navigated the hospital corridors, Thomas was struck by how different everything looked compared to his arrival. The same white walls and antiseptic smell surrounded him, but his perception had shifted completely. Where before he had seen only clinical efficiency, now he noticed the small touches of humanity: a child's drawing pinned to a bulletin board, fresh flowers at the nurse's station, the genuine smile of an orderly greeting an elderly patient. "Had I forgotten how to see?" he wondered silently. "Or did I deliberately stop looking?" Outside, the October air carried the crisp scent of fallen leaves and wood smoke. Thomas breathed deeply, savoring the simple pleasure of being alive on an autumn morning. Michael helped him into the passenger seat of the family station wagon, the same vehicle Thomas had driven for 15 years, but which now felt like a relic from another life. "Sarah called while you were getting dressed," Michael mentioned as they pulled away from the hospital. "She said the federal prosecutor wants to meet with us tomorrow about Scout's permanent placement." "Sounds promising." Thomas nodded, his gaze drawn to the familiar streets of Pine Ridge passing outside the window. The town looked different somehow, or perhaps it was Thomas himself who had changed. The hardware store where he'd bought Margaret's gardening supplies, the diner where they'd had breakfast every Sunday after church, the park where they'd walked their last dog together decades ago. All these landmarks remained, but his relationship to them had shifted subtly. "Everything's changed, hasn't it?" he said quietly, more to himself than to Michael. His son glanced over, understanding in his eyes. "Not everything, Dad. Just the parts that needed to." As they turned onto Maple Street, Thomas felt a flutter of anxiety. The house came into view, the white colonial with green shutters where he and Margaret had raised their son, where she had died, where he had retreated from life for 7 long years. The maple tree in the front yard was ablaze with autumn color, dropping golden leaves onto the lawn in a silent, continuous dance. But something was different. The front garden, which Thomas had maintained as an exact replica of Margaret's design for 7 years, had been transformed. The overgrown roses had been pruned back, the tired perennials divided and rearranged. The shrine-like quality was gone, replaced by something more alive, more vibrant, yet still honoring the original vision. "I hope you don't mind," Michael said, noting his father's fixed gaze. "Sarah helped me with the garden. She said sometimes you need to cut back to allow for new growth." Thomas found he couldn't speak past the lump in his throat. He nodded instead, blinking rapidly against unexpected moisture in his eyes. Then the front door opened, and Scout bounded down the porch steps, his tail a blur of motion, his amber eyes fixed on the car with uncanny recognition. Sarah followed more sedately, a warm smile lighting her features as she watched dog and humans reunite. Scout reached the car before Thomas could fully exit, pressing against his legs with such enthusiasm that Michael had to steady his father. "Easy, boy," Thomas laughed, the sound surprising him with its naturalness. "I'm still a bit wobbly." With Michael's support on one side and Scout pressed reassuringly against his leg on the other, Thomas made his way up the porch steps. The simple act of coming home felt monumental, weighted with significance beyond the physical return to a familiar space. Sarah greeted him with a gentle hug. "Welcome home, Dr. Mitchell," she said, her voice warm with genuine emotion. "Someone's been waiting very impatiently for you." Inside, Thomas was struck by the subtle changes to his home. The heavy drapes Margaret had loved had been drawn back, allowing sunlight to flood the living room. Fresh flowers, not from Margaret's garden, but wild flowers in simple arrangements, brightened tabletops. Photos remained in their familiar places, but they seemed less like memorials now and more like celebrations of a life well lived. "We thought you might want to rest before lunch," Sarah suggested, guiding him toward the study that had been converted to a temporary bedroom. The doctor said short rest periods throughout the day would be beneficial. Thomas nodded, suddenly aware of the fatigue settling into his bones. The short journey from hospital to home had depleted his limited reserves of energy. Scout followed him into the study, jumping onto the bed without invitation and settling himself along one side, leaving just enough space for Thomas. "I think he's appointed himself your personal nurse," Michael observed from the doorway, amusement coloring his voice. Thomas settled onto the bed, Scout immediately shifting to press against his side with a contented sigh. "More like a guardian angel," Thomas murmured, remembering how the dog had responded when he collapsed, how those precious minutes might have made the difference between life and death. Left alone with Scout, Thomas took in the transformed study. His medical journals and reference books remained, but they'd been organized, the layer of dust removed. Margaret's knitting basket, which had sat untouched in the corner for 7 years, was gone. In its place stood a comfortable dog bed, though it was clear from Scout's current position that he had no intention of using it. "We've both been displaced, haven't we, boy?" Thomas said softly, running his hand along Scout's silky ear. "Both found ourselves somewhere unexpected." Scout responded with a gentle lick to Thomas's hand, then settled his head on his paws with a deep sigh, as if to say, "This is exactly where I'm supposed to be." Sleep claimed Thomas quickly, his body still recovering from the trauma it had endured. He dreamed of Margaret, not as she had been in her final days, thin and pain-racked, but as she had been in her prime. In the dream, she stood in their garden, pruning her beloved roses with confident snips, her blonde hair caught up in a careless knot. "You're finally listening," Dream Margaret said, not looking up from her task. "It took you long enough." "Listening to what?" Thomas asked, moving to stand beside her. She gestured around them, at the garden, at the house, at the world beyond. "To life, Tommy. It's still happening all around you, even when you try to freeze it in place." She finally looked at him, her blue eyes twinkling with the mischief he'd fallen in love with 40 years ago. "I'm glad you saved that dog. He's saving you right back." Thomas woke to the gentle pressure of Scout's head on his chest, the dog's amber eyes watching him with uncanny perception. Outside, he could hear Michael and Sarah's voices drifting through the open window, something about dinner plans and medication schedules. The dream lingered, Margaret's presence still palpable in a way that felt comforting rather than haunting. "You're right, Maggie," he whispered, scratching Scout behind the ears. "He is saving me right back." The following morning brought the meeting with the federal prosecutor, a serious young woman named Rebecca Zhang, who arrived carrying both a laptop and a thick folder of documents. She settled at the kitchen table, Scout immediately positioning himself at Thomas's feet as if to emphasize their connection. "Dr. Mitchell," Rebecca began, her tone professionally neutral, "I've reviewed your application for the conditional adoption of the German Shepherd designated as Evidence Item #47, also known as Scout." She glanced down at the dog, her expression softening slightly. "Given the unusual circumstances, your role in exposing the Westfield operation and the dog's apparent attachment to you, the U.S. Attorney's Office is inclined to approve the placement with certain conditions." Thomas nodded, trying to maintain an appropriate level of professional detachment despite the surge of relief coursing through him. "I understand." "What conditions?" Rebecca opened her folder, extracting a document. "First, regular veterinary checkups and behavioral assessments for a minimum of 2 years, with reports submitted to our office. Second, compliance with a rehabilitation plan developed by Ms. Collins in her capacity as consultant to the Federal Animal Evidence Program. Third, no relocation outside of the state without prior approval." The terms were reasonable, even generous considering the circumstances. Thomas nodded his agreement, willing to accept any conditions that would make Scout legally his. "There's one more thing," Rebecca continued, her expression turning serious again. "We need to discuss the matter of testimony. The Westfield case is proceeding to federal court. Both you and Ms. Collins will be key witnesses, as will your son." Thomas felt a chill run through him at the thought of facing Westfield in court, of having to recount the details of the dog-fighting operation, of admitting his own unwitting complicity over the years. "When?" "The trial is scheduled to begin in 3 months," Rebecca replied, "but there's a development you should be aware of. Eleanor Westfield has come forward with additional evidence against her ex-husband." The name caught Thomas by surprise. "Eleanor? Richard's ex-wife?" Rebecca nodded, a hint of satisfaction breaking through her professional demeanor. "She approached us after his arrest, offering documentation dating back 15 years. Breeding records, financial transactions, even video footage of fighting events. According to Ms. Westfield, she left her husband when she discovered the true nature of his business, but feared coming forward due to his connections and threats against her." This revelation added yet another layer to the already complex case. Thomas thought back to the occasional glimpses he'd had of Eleanor Westfield over the years, a quiet, elegant woman who had seemed to fade into the background of her husband's public persona. How many others had underestimated her as he had? "Her testimony, combined with the physical evidence and your accounts, creates an essentially airtight case," Rebecca continued. "Which brings me to a potential opportunity." She glanced at Scout, then back to Thomas. "Given your medical condition and the circumstances, the U.S. Attorney is willing to accept a detailed written statement from you in lieu of in-person testimony, provided you're available for deposition." The consideration surprised Thomas. Why would they offer that? "Frankly—" "Public relations," Rebecca admitted. "The story of a respected veterinarian who nearly died exposing animal cruelty, saved by the very dog he rescued. It's compelling. The U.S. Attorney's Office isn't immune to good publicity, Dr. Mitchell." After Rebecca left with signed documents confirming Scout's conditional placement with Thomas, the kitchen fell into a contemplative silence. Scout, seemingly aware that his future had just been secured, rested his head on Thomas's knee with a contented sigh. "Eleanor Westfield," Sarah mused, breaking the silence. "I met her a few times while working at the kennels. She always seemed distant, controlled. I had no idea she was gathering evidence." "People surprise you," Thomas replied, thinking of his own transformation over the past weeks. "Sometimes, even themselves." Michael returned from seeing Rebecca to her car, an odd expression on his face. "She left something for you, Dad," he said, holding out a cream-colored envelope. "Said Eleanor Westfield asked her to deliver it personally." Thomas accepted the envelope with a puzzled frown. Inside was a single sheet of expensive stationery, the handwriting elegant and precise. "Dr. Mitchell, you don't know me, though we've met at various charity functions over the years. I have followed your recent ordeal with great interest and admiration. What you may not know is that 20 years ago, I discovered Richard's true business. When I confronted him, he threatened not only my life, but the lives of my family members. I chose to leave, to document, to wait for the right moment, a moment that never seemed to come as his influence grew and his operation expanded. Your courage in confronting him, despite the personal cost, gave me the strength to finally come forward. For that I thank you." The enclosed key belongs to a safety deposit box at First National Bank, box hash 247. Inside you will find documentation of Richard's earliest operations, including evidence that he deliberately targeted you after your wife's passing, recognizing your grief as an opportunity to exploit your professional detachment. I failed many animals by my silence. Perhaps this information will help bring some measure of justice to those we couldn't save. With respect and gratitude, Eleanor Westfield. A small key had fallen from the envelope when Thomas opened it. He stared at it now, this tangible connection to a story he was only beginning to understand. "What is it, Dad?" Michael asked, concern evident in his voice. Thomas handed him the letter, still processing Eleanor's revelation. The deliberate targeting after Margaret's death confirmed his worst suspicions, adding a layer of calculated cruelty to Westfield's actions that made Thomas's stomach turn. Sarah read the letter over Michael's shoulder, her expression hardening. "That manipulative bastard," she muttered, uncharacteristic anger coloring her voice. "He saw your grief as a business opportunity." Thomas nodded slowly, the pieces falling into place. "And I made it easy for him. I stopped questioning, stopped connecting, just followed protocol." The admission hurt, but there was healing in the truth. "I failed those animals." "No," Michael said firmly, placing a hand on his father's shoulder. "Westfield failed them. He's the criminal here, not you." Thomas appreciated his son's defense, but knew the reality was more complex. His professional detachment, his retreat into grief, had created the perfect environment for Westfield's manipulation. He couldn't absolve himself entirely, nor did he want to. Acknowledgement of his role, however unwitting, was part of his path forward. Scout whined softly, pressing closer to Thomas as if sensing his distress. The simple act of comfort from the dog who had every reason to distrust humans after his treatment at Westfield's hands moved Thomas deeply. "Tomorrow," he said finally, "we'll go to the bank. See what Eleanor has left for us." He scratched Scout behind the ears, drawing strength from the connection. "Then we move forward, no more living in the past." As he spoke the words, Thomas felt Margaret's presence, not as the ghost that had haunted him for 7 years, but as the partner who had always encouraged him to grow, to change, to embrace life fully. She would have approved of this moment, he thought, of Scout, of Michael's return, even of Sarah's steady presence in their lives. For the first time since Margaret's death, Thomas Mitchell felt himself fully present in his own life, not merely existing, but living. The road ahead would have challenges, his recovery, the Westfield case, rebuilding his practice. But with Scout at his side, Michael back home, and the unexpected ally he'd found in Sarah, Thomas no longer feared the journey. The truth, once buried beneath layers of grief and denial, had finally emerged into the light. And like Scout, who had somehow maintained his capacity for trust despite abuse, Thomas found himself ready to embrace a future he hadn't believed possible just weeks before. Spring had come to Pine Ridge, transforming Thomas's garden with vibrant blooms and fresh greenery. 6 months had passed since Scout officially became part of the Mitchell family. 6 months of healing, rebuilding, and discovering a new normal. Thomas sat on the porch swing, watching Scout chase a butterfly across the lawn with puppy-like enthusiasm despite his now adult size. The German Shepherd had filled out beautifully, his coat glossy and thick, the haunted look in his amber eyes replaced by confidence and joy. "He's showing off for you," Michael commented, emerging from the house with 2 glasses of iced tea. He handed one to his father before settling into the wicker chair nearby. "Every time Sarah's car turns onto our street, he starts prancing around like he's in a dog show." Thomas smiled, glancing at his watch. Sarah was due any minute with news from the courthouse. Today marked the conclusion of Richard Westfield's federal trial, a proceeding that had riveted the community and made national headlines. The evidence Eleanor Westfield had provided, combined with Thomas's testimony and the physical evidence from the kennels, had created an overwhelming case against the once untouchable breeder. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gone ahead with the euthanasia that day?" Michael asked, his voice contemplative. "If Scout hadn't put his paw on your hand?" Thomas considered the question, watching Scout now sitting alert at the edge of the driveway, ears perked forward in anticipation of Sarah's arrival. "I'd probably still be going through the motions," he admitted. "Still living half a life, still missing everything important." Michael nodded, understanding in his eyes. The past 6 months had rebuilt the father-son relationship that grief had fractured 7 years before. They had discovered a shared purpose in animal welfare work, with Michael continuing his position with the State Oversight Board, while Thomas slowly resumed a modified veterinary practice. The sound of tires on gravel announced Sarah's arrival. Scout's entire body quivered with excitement, though he maintained the wait position Thomas had taught him until the car door opened. Then he was off, racing to greet Sarah with joyful enthusiasm. "Well, that answers that question," Sarah called, laughing as Scout circled her, tail wagging furiously. "He definitely recognizes the sound of my car now." Thomas felt a familiar warmth spread through his chest at the sight of Sarah, a feeling that had grown steadily over the months of working together. What had begun as a professional collaboration had evolved into friendship, and lately into something more. At 68, Thomas had never expected to feel this way again, had believed that part of his life ended with Margaret. The surprise of it still caught him off guard sometimes. Sarah made her way up the path, Scout trotting proudly beside her. Her expression told Thomas everything he needed to know even before she spoke. 25 years, she announced, settling beside Thomas on the swing. No possibility of parole for 15. The judge cited the calculated cruelty and systematic exploitation of animals and people alike, plus financial restitution to fund rehabilitation for the dogs and compensation for the victims. Thomas exhaled slowly, a complex mixture of emotions washing over him. Relief, vindication, and a strange sort of sadness for the man Westfield might have been had his talents been directed toward compassion rather than cruelty. "Eleanor?" he asked, thinking of the quiet woman whose evidence had proven so crucial. "She was there," Sarah confirmed, "sitting in the back. She nodded to me when the verdict was read, then slipped out before the media could catch her." "I think she's finally found her peace." Scout settled at their feet, his head resting on Thomas's shoe in a gesture that had become a familiar comfort. The dog seemed to sense the significance of the moment, his usual energy temporarily subdued. "So it's really over," Michael said, the relief evident in his voice. "This part is," Sarah agreed. "But the work continues. There are still 32 dogs in rehabilitation from Westfield's operation and more cases being discovered as his network unravels." She reached down to scratch Scout behind the ears. "But today, we celebrate this victory." The three sat in companionable silence for a moment, each processing the news in their own way. For Thomas, the verdict represented more than justice for Scout and the other animals. It marked the closing of a chapter that had begun with his own unwitting complicity and ended with his conscious choice to stand for what was right, regardless of personal cost. "I should tell Margaret," Thomas said suddenly, rising from the swing. It was a phrase that would have worried Michael months ago, but now his son simply nodded in understanding. "We'll start dinner," Michael replied. "Take your time, Dad." Thomas made his way through the garden, Scout naturally falling into step beside him. The path to the small memorial garden they had created for Margaret was lined with her favorite peonies, now budding with the promise of early summer blooms. The space was no longer the shrine-like recreation of her garden that Thomas had maintained for years, but a living, evolving tribute that changed with the seasons while honoring her memory. A simple stone bench sat beneath the flowering dogwood tree. Thomas settled onto it, Scout immediately positioning himself at his feet. "We did it, Maggie," Thomas said softly, looking at the small plaque they had installed in the garden. Not a grave marker, her ashes had been scattered in the mountains as she'd requested, but a place to connect, to remember. "Westfield's been convicted. Scout's officially ours. The clinic is reopening next month." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "And I think I might be falling in love again." The admission came easier than he had expected. For years, the idea of caring for someone after Margaret had seemed impossible, even disloyal. Now, with time and healing, Thomas understood that his heart had room for both. The enduring love for his wife and the growing affection for Sarah. Different loves, each valuable in its own way. "You'd like her," he continued, a small smile playing at his lips. "She's straightforward, like you were. Doesn't let me get away with anything. And she loves Scout almost as much as I do." Scout looked up at the sound of his name, then rested his head on Thomas's knee with a contented sigh. The simple pressure, the unquestioning companionship, filled Thomas with gratitude. This dog, who had every reason to fear humans after his treatment at Westfield's hands, had instead chosen trust, chosen connection. "I'm learning from him," Thomas told Margaret's memorial, "learning how to trust again, how to live in the present. He doesn't forget what happened to him. You can see it sometimes when he flinches at a raised hand or cowers at certain sounds, but he doesn't let it define him either." As if understanding, Scout pressed closer, his warm weight against Thomas's leg a reassuring presence. The bond between them had deepened over the months, each healing the other's wounds in ways neither science nor psychology could fully explain. A gentle breeze stirred the dogwood blossoms, sending white petals drifting down around them like snow. Thomas closed his eyes, feeling Margaret's presence not as a ghost or a memory, but as a foundation. The love that had shaped him, prepared him for this moment, this life. "Thank you," he whispered, to Margaret, to Scout, to whatever force had brought them together in that exam room 6 months ago. When Thomas returned to the house, he found Michael and Sarah in the kitchen, preparing dinner together with the easy familiarity of people comfortable in each other's company. Scout trotted ahead, positioning himself strategically near the counter where chicken was being sliced. "No begging," Thomas admonished gently, though all three knew Scout would eventually receive his share. The dog had become an expert at what Michael jokingly called passive-aggressive waiting, sitting perfectly behaved but fixing humans with a soulful gaze that made denial nearly impossible. "How are you feeling?" Sarah asked, her expression softening as she studied Thomas's face. "At peace," he replied, surprising himself with the simple truth of it, for the first time in a very long time. Dinner that evening had the feeling of a celebration, though understated in the way Thomas preferred. The conversation flowed easily from the trial to plans for the clinic's reopening to Scout's progress in his therapy dog training. The German Shepherd, who had once been destined for death as too aggressive, was now weeks away from certification to work with traumatized children. "I've been thinking," Thomas said as they finished dessert, "about what comes next, for all of us." He glanced at Michael, then at Sarah, feeling a strange nervousness despite having rehearsed these words in his mind. "The house is too big for just me, even with Scout. Michael, I know you've been talking about finding your own place again." "Dad, I'm not going anywhere if you need me here," Michael interrupted, concern evident in his voice. "Let me finish," Thomas said gently. "I'm not asking you to stay out of obligation, but I am suggesting we consider making some changes to the property." He took a deep breath. "The lot is large enough to build a second small house at the back. You could have your own space but still be close. And maybe," he glanced at Sarah, "maybe we could convert part of the clinic building into a rehabilitation facility for rescued dogs, with proper staff and equipment." Sarah's eyes widened slightly. "That would require significant investment and expertise beyond basic veterinary care." "I know," Thomas nodded. "That's why I've been talking with the foundation managing the restitution funds from Westfield's case. They're interested in establishing a model facility for rehabilitation. With your experience and my medical background, we could create something special." The idea had been forming in Thomas's mind for weeks, a purpose for his remaining years that honored both Margaret's memory and the new connections he had formed. A way to transform the pain of the past into something healing, something hopeful. "I could help with the regulatory aspects," Michael offered, clearly warming to the idea. "Make sure everything meets state requirements." Sarah was quiet for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "It would mean staying in Pine Ridge permanently," she said finally, "making a long-term commitment." Thomas met her gaze steadily. Yes, it would. Something passed between them in that look, an acknowledgement of what remained unspoken, the personal dimension of that commitment beyond the professional collaboration. Scout, sensing the significance of the moment, moved to sit between them, his amber eyes moving from one human to the other with uncanny perception. "I think," Sarah said slowly, a smile spreading across her face, "that Pine Ridge is exactly where I want to be." Later that evening, after Sarah had left with plans to return the following day to discuss the project further, Thomas and Michael sat on the porch watching fireflies begin their nightly dance across the lawn. Scout lay between them, exhausted from the excitement of the day. "Are you sure about all this, Dad?" Michael asked, the golden light of sunset highlighting the resemblance between father and son. "It's a big undertaking at—" He hesitated. "At my age?" Thomas finished with a wry smile. "Yes, I'm sure. For the first time in years, I'm looking forward rather than backward. I want to build something that matters, something that will continue even when I'm gone." Michael nodded, understanding the legacy his father wanted to create. "And Sarah?" he asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Is she part of that future too?" Thomas glanced down at Scout, who had rolled onto his back, legs twitching slightly as he dreamed. "I hope so," he answered honestly. "We're taking it slowly, figuring things out day by day. But yes, I care for her deeply." "Mom would approve," Michael said quietly. "She always said you were hopeless on your own, needed someone practical to balance your idealism." Thomas laughed, the sound startling a nearby cardinal into flight. "She wasn't wrong." He sobered, looking at his son directly. "You know Sarah isn't replacing your mother, right? No one could ever do that." "I know, Dad," Michael assured him. The heart doesn't work that way. It's not like a pie with only so many slices to go around. The phrase triggered a memory for Thomas. Sarah using similar words to reassure a child who worried about loving a new pet after losing one. The parallel made him smile. Exactly, he agreed. The heart expands. As darkness settled over the garden, Thomas reflected on the journey that had brought him here. 6 months ago, he had been a man sleepwalking through his own life, hiding from pain behind professional detachment and routine. Now, he felt awake, engaged, connected, to Scout, to Michael, to Sarah, to his community, and even to Margaret's memory in a healthier way. All because a condemned dog had placed a paw on his hand, had looked into his eyes with a plea he couldn't ignore. "Come on, boy," Thomas said, gently rousing Scout from his nap. "Time for your evening walk." At the familiar words, Scout jumped up eagerly, trotting to the door where his leash hung on a hook. Thomas followed more slowly, his body still reminding him occasionally of the heart attack that had nearly claimed his life. But each day brought more strength, more energy, more life. As they walked together through the quiet streets of Pine Ridge, neighbors called out greetings, children asked to pet Scout, fellow dog walkers stopped to chat. Thomas realized he had become reintegrated into the community he had withdrawn from after Margaret's death, reconnected to the world around him. Their path took them past the clinic building, closed these past months but soon to reopen with its expanded mission. Thomas paused, looking at the familiar structure with new eyes, imagining what it could become. Not just a place for routine vaccinations and minor ailments, but a center for healing, for second chances. Scout sat patiently beside him, those intelligent amber eyes seeming to understand the significance of the moment. When Thomas finally turned to continue their walk, the German shepherd pressed briefly against his leg in what felt like approval. "We're going to help a lot of dogs like you," Thomas told him, scratching behind those expressive ears. "Give them the chance you got." Later that night, as Thomas prepared for bed, Scout already settled in his customary spot on the rug beside the bed, he found himself drawn to the window overlooking the garden. The full moon illuminated Margaret's memorial garden, the white dogwood blossoms ghostly in the silver light. Thomas thought about the security deposit box Eleanor Westfield had directed them to, about the documents inside that had proven so crucial to the case against her ex-husband. Among the evidence had been a memo from Westfield to his kennel manager, dated just weeks after Margaret's funeral. "Mitchell is vulnerable now. Grief has made him sloppy, less attentive. Use his clinic exclusively for disposals. He won't ask questions." The calculated cruelty of it still had the power to shake Thomas even months later. But alongside the anger and regret came a more powerful emotion, gratitude for the awakening that had come, however painfully, from that manipulation. Without Westfield's exploitation of his grief, Thomas might never have saved Scout. Without Scout, he might never have reconnected with Michael, never met Sarah, never found this new purpose for his remaining years. "Every ending is a beginning," Margaret had often said. Standing in the moonlight, Thomas finally understood the truth of her words. Scout stirred from his place on the rug, moving to stand beside Thomas at the window. Together, man and dog looked out at the moon-drenched garden, at the promise of tomorrow, at the life they had saved for each other. "Good night, Maggie," Thomas whispered to the garden below. Then he turned to Scout, patting his head gently. "And thank you, boy, for bringing me back to life." Scout pressed his muzzle against Thomas's hand, not the desperate plea of their first meeting, but a gesture of companionship, of mutual salvation. In that simple touch was everything Thomas had learned these past months, that healing was possible, that love endured in unexpected ways, that sometimes the souls who need saving and those who do the saving are one and the same. As he finally turned away from the window and climbed into bed, Scout settling on the floor beside him with a contented sigh, Thomas Mitchell knew with absolute certainty that he was exactly where he was meant to be. The journey had been painful, the cost high, but the reward, this second chance at a meaningful life, was worth every step. In the quiet darkness, his hand dangling from the bed to rest on Scout's warm back, Thomas drifted toward sleep with a peace he hadn't known in 7 years. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new joys, new opportunities to heal and be healed, and he was ready for all of it. Dear friends, Thomas Mitchell's journey reminds us that it's never too late for a second chance at life. After losing his wife Margaret, Thomas retreated into grief for 7 years, going through the motions without truly living. It took a desperate German shepherd named Scout placing a paw on his hand to awaken his heart again. Through saving Scout, Thomas reconnected with his estranged son, found new purpose, and even opened himself to unexpected love. His story teaches us that healing doesn't mean forgetting those we've lost, but rather honoring them by living fully again. The heart doesn't divide its love like slices of pie. It expands. Whether you've lost a spouse, grown distant from family, or simply feel you've lost your purpose, remember Thomas and Scout. Two broken souls who saved each other and found a new beginning. Have you ever experienced a moment that awakened you from grief or brought you back to life after loss? Or is there a special animal companion who helped heal your heart when you needed it most? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.